Hey y'all, welcome back. We're back at Proverbs, chapter 11. If you haven't seen the first 10 chapters, or there's more than 10 videos because some of them are broken up, but there's a lot of videos from Proverbs 1 through 10,
Right.
and those are foundation, especially Proverbs 1 through 9 are the foundational teachings. Proverbs 10 is where he actually starts into the Proverbs. So if you haven't seen those, stop now and go ahead and go back and watch those, because we're actually going to be talking about some of those teachings in Proverbs 1 through 9.
Right.
So then we'll talk about how Solomon is teaching.
We're going to come along today, and we're just going to spend some time sitting a while in
Right.
Solomon's house. As we were breaking this down, doing our study to teach, God showed us something very interesting, and so we just kind of asked him, well, how could we show what you showed us?
Right.
And he just, God is amazing. How he's delightful sometimes, just the way he'll show us how to do something.
Right.
If we just ask him. So we're going to invite you to come along with us to sit a while in Solomon's house. Just to kind of sit that up, we need to understand that these proverbs were something that not only was Solomon writing down, we've talked about his love of, just writing, catching lessons and wisdom and everything, but that he's teaching. It's unfortunate today in our, specifically in the American household, parents are, we get up in the morning and the kids go this direction and the parents go this direction, there's work and there's school and life is very hectic. And so we have lost a lot of things. In the home and in the family that God knew was crucial for our homes and our families, for marriages, for parenting. And so with that being said, we just we want to break down a couple of things and really show the importance of teaching these proverbs and learning these proverbs.
And what we're going to do is we're going to look at we're going to look at their culture. We're going to look at the Jewish culture and how God intended for them to teach their children. He basically set up kind of like guidelines on how to raise your children up and to teach them about Him.
That's right, and we have to remember that there was a very specific culture in the Jewish lifestyle. But the Bible is not just written to Jewish people. It is for all mankind. So as we're studying that culture and that way of life, the way that a home, was being run, then we understand that because we find it in the Bible, that it's not a Jewish culture alone, but it's for all of us, whether we live in America or Africa or India or, whether we're rich, poor, black, white, old, young, it doesn't matter. The Bible is true after all. And so as we just break this down, just keep that in mind that, these were being taught daily in the home. And we are to teach these daily in the home.
And one of the things that we will learn from this is that as we teach these things daily to our children, they serve as reminders. One of the ways in my worldly work, one of the ways that I was able to teach people how to do certain jobs is in one of the ways that I knew that they knew it well enough was to have them teach it to others. And I would watch them teach it. Now that does a couple of things, and one of the things that it does is it refreshes their mind. to what they're actually teaching. And it also causes them to look at what they're teaching in a different light.
Right.
And so that actually causes those lessons, whatever it is, to get down in you.
Right.
Now, if you're teaching God's lessons
Right.
to your children, it'll refresh it in you, in your mind, and it'll get it down in you.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right. Right. So just see, now we're going to go back before we jump over here in Proverbs.
Right.
We're going to make a connection here, and we're going to go to Deuteronomy. I'm going to read one verse out of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7. Right. You're going to follow along, and it's this: "And you shall teach them diligently unto your children, and you will talk of them when you sit in your house." Right. "When you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." Okay, so the verse before that says, "I command you this day," that's verse 6. "These are the things that shall be in your heart."
Right.
So we know that anything we have in our heart is something that we treasure. It's something valuable. It's something that we have a feeling about. Our emotions, we feel things in our heart. Right. So he's commanding, this is God speaking, he's commanding these things. What Solomon is doing in the Proverbs is he knew God commanded these things because he had been raised by David, Bathsheba, under these teachings. Yeah. And he knows that because he was taught, now he is to teach. Yes. And so we see this in Deuteronomy 6. We see it as a commandment. Right. So let me just stop right there and say this. God doesn't let us off the hook as parents. Right. We cannot just, the Bible says children are, they're a heritage to the womb. They're a blessing to the womb. So our children are blessings from God. Yes. And he expects us to do something with them, to teach them, to raise them. So we see this. He commands, "You shall teach them diligently." Right. We see Solomon, he is constantly, we see the art of repetition. He's saying the same thing over and over and over. He wants to make sure that this kid gets it. Yeah. And so we see the word diligently, "and you will teach them diligently and shall talk of these commands," what's in the Bible, and then we're going to jump there to it, "when you sit in your house." And so when we were trying to break this down, the next few Proverbs, God showed us a very beautiful thing that Solomon was doing. While we're sitting in our house, we have a command. Right. When we are in our homes with our family, with our children, with our spouses, we have this command to be teaching something. Yeah. And God was specific about what we were to be teaching. Right. And there's a couple of places in our house, specifically in our house, that we sit commonly. Right. And one of the biggest places is the living room, the living space, whatever you call it. Some people call it a great room. Some people call it a family room. Some people just call it a living room. Right. And there's these big, comfortable places to sit. There's a sofa, and then there's maybe a recliner or some type of chairs that are comfortable to lounge in or to sit in. And these are commonly in the American homes, there's a TV. And it seems like every chair or piece of furniture in the living room is surrounding that television, pointed directly toward it like a shrine. Right. And in that television has become the main attraction in the house. It's not only the main attraction, but it's the primary teacher of the house. It's true. And so if you don't believe that, all you have to do is spend a few minutes talking to your children to find out that what comes out of their mouth is going to be something that they've heard or seen on television. And then a lot of times those televisions will be accompanied by some game
systems. There's lots of things that can go on in the living room with around the television. Games. There's DVD players. There's VCRs, which are kind of outdated now. Maybe they're not VCRs. I don't know, but there's a lot of things that connect to the TV.
Right.
There's internet service. There's all of these things that connect to the TV that allow us to view a lot of different things on that television.
Right.
And the statistics on this kind of teaching that's coming from the television, like cable TV. I saw a statistic that said in 2022, they did a research on the programs on television, and they were showing that there was between 8,000 and 16,000 murders on television that these elementary school kids would view by the time they were finished with elementary school. Between 8,000 and 16,000, and this was just on regular cable TV. And that was just on TV. That wasn't counting games. That wasn't counting movies, DVDs, anything like that. That was just on television.
It's important to remember, just to make the connection, because we are teaching on Proverbs.
Right.
If we look at that statistic alone, on violence, murders, killing, those type things, what are we teaching?
Right.
While we're sitting in our houses,
Right.
by allowing these things to sit in front of our children, in front of our families. But then we go to the Proverbs, and we see that while Solomon is sitting in his house, he's teaching against violence.
Right.
This is God inspiring Solomon to tell not only his son, but this is God telling us,
Right.
I don't want you to have anything to do with that type thing. It's no wonder that we have a mad world where we have all of these shootings and these, home invasions and all of the things that we're seeing. Because while we're sitting in our house,
Right.
he commanded us what we were to be teaching.
Exactly.
Solomon did his job.
Yeah.
He was teaching his child. If we go back to Proverbs 1, I know when we looked it up, it was in the first chapter. He's already teaching his son. This is God saying, don't even come over here with these violent, wicked people, because you will get caught up in that mess.
Yeah. And you may think or say to us, I was just watching TV. I wasn't trying to teach my kid. I wasn't trying to teach my kid anything. But remembering that most people, most children are visual learners.
Right.
We're visual learners. That's why we have this board right here with these words. We're visual learners. Most people are visual learners. So if we see something and we hear something, we're going to learn from that. So by our actions teach our kids more a lot of times than our words.
It's true. More lessons are caught than taught. If we're sitting in our living rooms, and all of this violence, what was it, 16,000 murders? By the time they get out of elementary school, we didn't sit there and tell our children, go out and kill people, go out and beat people, go out and whatever the violent act may be. But they have caught those lessons, even though we didn't speak them out of our mouth to them, telling them to do it. Well, we sure didn't tell them not to. So they have now caught that lesson that, this is acceptable. Or maybe they're just scared to death because children are so impressionable. No wonder that we have such a rise in children. I'm talking young children. I know of a 3-year-old who is on anxiety and depression medication now because he cannot go to sleep because because he's having nightmares
Right.
about some of the things that he has seen and heard
Right.
on television.
Right. And we are we are impressionable. We're impressionable by if we're a kid, we're impressionable by other kids. If we're an adult, we're impressionable by other adults. If we're sometimes if we're not a very mature adult, we're impressionable by kids.
True.
Right? You see all the time. You have grown adult people dressing and acting like teenagers.
Very true.
That means that adult is still immature in their thinking, and they're acting out that immaturity.
True. And Solomon was, in his wisdom, he knew these things.
Right.
And so we see this constant teaching. We've talked about it so many times. He goes to the window and he's teaching. He sees the ant, he's teaching. He sees the tree, he's teaching. He sees dishonest business dealings and he's teaching. He's constantly teaching because he knew that his child would be at the mercies of this wicked world if he did not teach him not just how to act himself. We've got to go back and look at this closely. He's not just teaching. Our responsibility is not just to teach our children how they should act, but our responsibility is to teach our children who they should avoid and who they should be drawn to in people. So we have to look at it. I love to say we got to read the Bible like it's really written. We've got to see it as it truly is. What is God really saying to us here? If he's saying, I command you to talk to your children while you're sitting in your house.
And he and the things that he's discussing, he's talking to a little kid, a 3, 4, 5-year-old kid. And he's telling them how to conduct business, and try to wrap your head around this, because what he does here and what he does throughout his writings is he knows that this is basically it's a textbook, and he is teaching his son how to grow up and be a man. How to treat women, how to treat his business, how to conduct himself honorably, so that people will want to do business with him, so that he will have a good reputation and a good name, and what kind of things to avoid, what kind of things to look for. Beware of the unequal balance that has been altered so that it can cheat people. It's a balance, all right? And they would weigh things out, and then you would pay or be paid according to the weight distribution. But if you have one side that is weighted heavier than it's supposed to be, throws things out of balance, somebody's getting cheated.
So with that thought in mind, going back to in our homes today, we've got our living room there behind us, as Barry said, the places that we would sit in our house, in our living rooms, what are we teaching versus what God instructed Solomon to record for us? As Barry said, I love that. A textbook, a guidebook. This is what you're supposed to be teaching while you're sitting in your house. And so going back, on these statistics of what we're doing while we're sitting in our living rooms versus what he was doing while he was sitting in his, it's astounding how far we have slipped.
One of the statistics that I was able to find, and because this is primarily talking to it's talking to God's children, it's talking to us, but Solomon was specifically teaching his son, one of the statistics that I found was adolescent boys play video games on average about 3 hours per day. 3 hours per day on average. Now, this was specifically talking to boys. I'm sure that, that girls are not as quite as interested in video games. I mean, they used to not be. They may be now. I don't know. I know that there's some crazy video games out on the market, and a lot of them, in my opinion, are not fit for kids.
Right.
They are directed and targeting the adolescent teens audience, and they're doing it through some underhanded, wicked ways of the devil.
True.
If you ask me, and there's a lot of things. They even come with warning labels now that says, okay, this is for kids over the age of 13, because there's stuff in here that little kids don't need to see. Well, thank God for that, but they shouldn't, in my opinion, they shouldn't allow any of that mess to be targeting kids.
Well, and the Proverbs proves it. Never, I challenge you, Proverbs 1 through 31, if you can get in there and find one time where we see God through Solomon inspiring his son to be violent, to be sexual, to be rude and crude and hateful and just disrespectful.
Right.
If you can prove that to me, I promise you I will get on here publicly and I will say I was wrong, you were right. But I can tell you that we're not going to find that.
Right.
And so, just knowing that as parents, we cannot allow these things, because remember, Deuteronomy says we have this command that we have to teach while we're sitting in our house, and he tells us what to teach. And Proverbs is just one book of many.
Exactly.
But we do have this guidebook. This is what you need to be teaching.
And it warns those things that the world teaches. Proverbs especially warns against.
Right.
It's basically saying, hey, these things are out there, and you're going to encounter them, and this is what you do when you encounter them.
Right.
This is how you treat those things.
That's right.
This is how you're supposed to conduct yourself.
Right. And
to be warned that, hey, you are to look for these things. You are to look for the evil man. You are to look for the adulterous harlot woman. You are to look for the evil person that tries to swindle people out of their money and cheat people out of their money in doing bad business. It warns his son. It warns us that we are to warn our children.
Right.
Because let's face it, today, in this world, in this society, it's just as bad or worse than what they were dealing with.
That's right. And we have to remember, let me say this, we don't have any small children at home. We have raised our children. We now have grandchildren. But we're not off the hook. We have to understand that, here he says, teach to your children sitting in your house. But we have to remember that we never, ever, ever fall out from under God's commands. So even Barry and I, even now, the two of us living alone in our house, we are still commanded to be careful what we do while we're sitting in our house.
Yes.
We had a good example this week. I've shared before. We don't have cable. We don't allow it in our home. So what we chose to do was to go to thrift stores, and we do it. We find them all the time. Christian movies. Some of them are Hallmark movies. They're not always just talking about Jesus and the plan of salvation, but wholesome. I like how Barry says they're wholesome movies. Well, we'll go to the thrift stores, and we read all the fine print. We made a decision that it wasn't good for us to have it in our home for us, and we don't have any children at home.
Mm-hmm.
And just this week, we went to the thrift store. We read the fine print.
Mm-hmm.
We came home with a stack of, the dollar movies.
Right.
And we were going to put one in.
Mm-hmm.
And it just it jumped off the bag. It said sensuality.
Right.
And I was like, no, whoa. Because it looked like a very wholesome movie.
Mm-hmm. It was PG.
It wasn't a dirty movie. It wasn't pornographic. It wasn't that. But that was questionable to us.
Right.
And so we looked at that and we were like, I don't know. It was back in 2005. I don't know what that means. And
Right.
so we could have made the decision while we were sitting in our house
Right.
to put that movie in, flip through that part if it wasn't, what it should have been. But we didn't. We came to that, well, we don't want to open that door.
Right.
We don't want to open, and I'm not saying, oh, look at us. I'm saying we didn't pay close enough attention.
Right.
And when we bought the movie, and so then we had it in our house.
Right.
We were here by ourselves. We could have watched the movie.
We're adults.
Oh, we're adults sometimes. But we knew that
Right.
God teaches us that while we're sitting in our house, we have a mandate.
Right.
Whether anybody ever sees, because that stuff will get down in your spirit.
Right.
And we've worked hard to try to get it out of our spirit.
Amen.
And I'm not gonna lie, we used to watch movies, that had things in them that we shouldn't really be seeing.
Right.
And so we made a decision not to do that, and we didn't want to open that door.
Right.
So I just said that to say this. While we're sitting in our house, as we go through this, don't think you're off the hook just because there's no little child there, because we are little children to our Father God. And this command is to us. And let me just say this. You might think nobody is ever going to see or know, but we have 18 grandkids, and I promise you, they all watch us. We have the 3-year-olds that will hold us accountable.
Right.
I the other day I said something to one of my grandchildren, and she said, "Are you supposed to say that?" And so they will hold us accountable.
Right.
We are always teaching.
Yeah.
And that's what Solomon knew. He was always teaching.
And so are you,
Yes.
whether you realize
Yes.
it or not.
Yes.
And especially if you've got kids around.
Yeah.
But you are teaching even if you're just around adults.
That's right.
Because adults learn from other adults as well.
That's right. That's right.
And especially if we are communicating with our words that we are believers, that we're followers of Christ, people are going to be looking at you to see if they can tell a difference,
Right.
to see if there's something different about you than there is about everybody else. And it is up to us to make sure that there is.
That's right.
And like Tammy said, we're not trying to say that we're better than anybody, because that is not what this is about. What we are all accountable to God for is, I know that before I made Jesus Christ my Lord and Savior, I lived a certain way, and I'm not proud of it. I'm not proud of the way that I lived by any means. But I can tell you that as Jesus Christ being my Lord and Savior and walking and following after Him, there should be a difference.
Right. And that's what Solomon is constantly doing.
Right.
That's what God is doing in the Proverbs. He's giving us these one-liners.
Right.
These one-liners. This is how you do this.
Right.
This is how you don't do it. This is how you do it. This is how you do that. This is how you should talk. This is how you should teach.
Right.
This is how you should act. This is how you should dress. This is what you do with your money. It's a constant teaching while they're sitting in their house. This is what's important for us to catch here, is that in the homes, Solomon was teaching what he had been taught. His parents had taught him these things in the home. This is how you act. This is how you don't act. This is what you do. This is what you can't do.
Right.
That's what God is telling us. He's saying all the time. I don't care. Our walk has to match our talk.
Right.
So if we're in our house and we're doing something that we shouldn't be doing,
right.
our children are going to see it, they're going to hear it, they're going to catch it, and they're probably going to do it. And trust me, they'll tell on it.
Right.
They will tell on us all the time. And Solomon knew that, but what's beautiful about this to me is that here we have a father and we have such a guidebook for parenting that you should look at this. Okay, I probably am going to have this kid in my house till maybe he's 18.
Right.
I have 18 years. Every second should be a teaching moment.
Right.
And we have to be careful that it's not violence and all of these things, the murders, all of those things that in the places where we sit in our living room, that's what we're teaching. Solomon says these are the things you've got to teach your children not to be that way.
Right.
And we cannot teach our children not to be that way if we're giving them a controller saying be that way. Just stay out of my hair.
Yeah. One other thing, in 2022, there was a company called VidAngel, and they did some research on television programs, and they listed what they found, and they said that they found out of all of the programming that they viewed, and it was based primarily basic cable television, like the CBS and ABCs and those kind of television stations, Fox, those things. And he said that they found 37 counts of profanity, blasphemy, or foul language in the programming per hour. 15 counts of sexual content, nudity, or immodesty per hour. 13 counts of violence, blood, or gore per hour. And 75 counts of potentially offensive content per hour. Now, they said potentially because everybody's got their own difference of what it takes to offend them, right? So it was potentially offensive to people.
Wow.
But this is the kind of things that we are allowing our children to see and experience, and this is just on regular television stations that that everybody has access to if they have a cable television.
Right. That's very sad. As he was reading, I haven't even looked at these things that he had written down, but I see per hour, per hour, per hour, per hour. Jesus said, "Can't you stay awake with me 1 hour?" In our homes, while we're sitting in our homes, in our living room, can we not stay awake for 1 hour? Look at that. 37 times in 1 hour that a child is going to see blasphemy. 15 times he's going to see some type of sexual content. 13 times violence, blood in 1 hour. 1 hour. Can we not stay awake for 1 hour while we're sitting in our homes? Solomon knew. I've got to stay awake. I have to stay on the wall with this kid of mine because God stayed on the wall with me, his child. We have to stay awake.
We have to stay vigilant because this is what the world is teaching your children. Our children. This is what the world is teaching them. And this is what God says we're supposed to teach them. And so if we are not doing what God wants us to do, well, it's no wonder of the law of sowing and reaping says that if you sow this, you're going to get mass shootings, you're going to get violence, you're going to get rapes and all kinds of negative things that we see on the news, the results of what happens when we're not teaching our children what God says we're supposed to teach them.
Right.
If we already have at least one lost generation. We have at least one lost generation. We have a generation out there that says, is Jesus somebody that goes to my school?
Right.
We have a lost generation out there, guys, that doesn't know who he is, that doesn't know what this word of God says. And because they don't know the good, all they know is the bad.
That's right.
And it's acceptable.
Right.
They think it's what they're supposed to be learning.
And doing.
Yeah, and doing.
And doing.
I remember when I was a kid, there was a big controversy about tobacco, cigarettes being advertised on television. Because they had advertisements of cigarettes everywhere. Even they had doctors smoking cigarettes in their doctor's office. And it was a big controversy. They got they were weighing it out and saying, okay, what are we teaching our kids? And eventually, thank God, they had enough sense to say, no, we don't need to have. I remember the Marlboro Man being on television. They said, no, we're not going to teach our kids that. That's not acceptable. Right. This is not acceptable, y'all.
That's right. That's right.
This is what we're supposed to be teaching.
And that's what we wanted to bring out here. That these are the rules and the commands that we are to be teaching in our homes.
Yes.
In our lives. Yes. At all times. We're going to, for the next 4 lessons, we're going to be digging out this Deuteronomy 6. It's not just while we're sitting. We'll see it. It's no matter what we're doing.
Right.
We are to be teaching and we are to be learning. It's a constant in and out, in and out, in and out.
Right.
Another time in our homes where we would be sitting, Deuteronomy 6 says, teach your children while you're sitting in your house.
Right.
So the other place that we could think of was at our kitchen tables.
Right.
When we are... we used to, when I was growing up, my mom would have dinner on the table, and the main one I remember was Wednesday nights, because my dad would be at work, right up until time for dinner and to go to church. So he would come home, and Mom would have dinner on the table, and we would eat. We would, talk about what was, maybe what happened in the day, or, but we knew we're going to church. And then, we didn't just get up from the table and push back and Mom go. No, we knew. We always knew that we were going to have dinner on the table, and that I did not get up from the table and not help clean up. And we knew that. And there was, there's a security in that. There's a stability in that. Today, in our world, most of the time, families aren't sitting at the table. Like I said, everybody's running in a different direction. What was the statistic? I actually looked it up. Yes. In 2003, 50% of families sat together. 50%. Now, that's only half in 2003.
Yeah.
Sat down at the table and had dinner together. In 2019, only 20%. Look at that decline from half, which is bad enough.
Right.
Because I grew up in a generation where most families sat down at the table.
Right.
And not only did they eat together, but, Jesus ate very often. The table, the place to sit down and have a meal was a time of fellowship, a time of connection. It was a time of teaching. It was a welcoming place. And that's the way I was raised. That's the way we did it in our home. But then, so I tried to raise my children that way. But we've lost these things as we've gone through time. And so we see that decline. The kitchen table, the family table, it deepens connection in the family. Kids are 3 times less likely to be depressed and have anxiety in their lives if we have that stability of knowing that we're going to have a meal,
Right.
but that we're going to have it together.
Yep.
We're going to all sit here. We're going to look at each other instead of a phone in our faces.
Right.
Get the picture, people.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so it would explain why children would be less anxious and depressed. And the statistics say that families who sit down at the table and talk together, and I'm telling you, you can find out some amazing things at the table, some really good and some not so great. The kids perform better at school if they have the family table. 91% of families will say their family is less stressed when they have meals together. And so with that being said, knowing that the living room, where we typically sit in our house, and the kitchen table where we typically sit in our house, those two places are crucial in the home that we are teaching our children, and that we are connecting as families. It's crucial, and this was the saddest thing to me of all the statistics that we did find. The typical meal in America only lasts 15 to 30 minutes. Barry spoke of the hour. In 1 hour, there are all these acts of violence and sex and profanity and all of these things in television, video games. Here we see that, sitting down at the table together as a family and using that time, as Solomon is teaching, sitting in his house, that we would take that opportunity sitting in our house, and we can't give God 15 minutes. We can't give our children 30 minutes at the table, looking at them without a phone in our face or a scowl on our face, but that we are, listening to them, hearing about their day, and sharing about ours, even if it's a bad day. 30 minutes, an hour, sitting in our house. How much could we teach? I'm telling you, in 15 minutes, you can read a whole chapter out of Proverbs. What could we do if we flipped the script here in our homes? And instead of getting at our kitchen tables, I'll cover that and you can cover the living room. Instead of coming, not even sitting down at the table, and I don't care if some people like elaborate meals and they're eating steak, and some are eating hot dogs and ramen noodles. I don't care what you put on that table. But I challenge you this week to follow God's words, the commands in Deuteronomy 6 that say, teach them while you're sitting in your house. If you could get all your kids to sit down at the table, and I'm about to tell you how you can do it. If you get all your kids sitting at the table, and you teach them, talk to them. Hey, what kind of person were you at school today? Did you speak respectfully to your teacher? Did you you might find out your child is being bullied, but you might find out your kid is the bully. If we just will make those connections at the table. And now I'm going to tell you how to do it. I challenge you this week. Let us go back to God's words. Here we have, through the Proverbs, all of these teachings. This is how you're supposed to do all of these things. Pick out one of them. Go to Dollar Tree. Buy yourself some pretty little napkins or a flower. Maybe you've got them at home. Draw your kids a picture. Have them help you set the table. Set that table. Make it different. It should be different. Because you want them to know, hey, something's about to change in this house. And tell your children, if you need to apologize to them because you haven't been sitting down as a family, apologize to them. Sit down with your families and teach. Pick out one of these. I don't care which one you pick out because they're all valuable. You're going to know which one is good for your family. But take that time this week at your family table. while you're sit your butt down in the chair at the kitchen table and teach your children. Because we are living in a crucial hour that if we don't take that time, we are going to regret it.
One other thing, take the phones away for 15 to 30 minutes, however long it takes, and make them something to eat that they enjoy.
Yes.
That way they're not fighting you because they don't want this, or that's not something that they like, because that's how kids try to get out of things. That's what they've learned works. So head that off at the pass, make them something that you know that they enjoy, and then say, okay, just for this 15 minutes, we're going to leave our phones over there in the living room, and we're going to sit down at the kitchen table.
And use the time as a teaching time. Remember, Solomon speaks about laziness. He uses the ant. Oh, what a perfect time to teach your kids.
Right.
Don't let your kid get up from that table. And I don't care if they're 3.
Right.
They can pick up something and they can take it to the kitchen sink. They might not can wash the dishes, but your 12-year-old can.
Yeah.
Use that time to teach. And then sit them down. Get out the story of the ants.
Right.
And explain to them, this is why you're going to help clean off the table tonight.
Yeah.
Use those moments sitting in your house to teach your children. Remember, Solomon wasn't given the whole 31 chapters of the plan of salvation.
Right.
He was teaching his child not to be lazy. When you come to the table and you eat dinner, when you get up from this table, you're expected not to be lazy, not to run off, but to pick up something. I promise you, a 3-year-old, he can pick up a spoon and he can walk it to the kitchen sink. You have just taught, and that is wisdom.